Welcome to Guidance Review. I'm David Pudwill, and today we're going to be talking about FDA's May 2020 guidance on face masks and respirators. So if we go ahead and pull up the guidance document, we can actually download the guidance document here. And if we go down to the docket number, we can head over to regulations.gov, which is right here, and we can check out some various information here regarding the guidance document, some history, some comments. If we open up the broader set of comments here, we can see that there are a lot of individual comments, and there are a couple comments as well from some key higher level, sort of broader organizations, groups of people. There are a number of commenters here that you'll see for a lot of different guidance documents. And some of these comments here are from people who really ought to just be reaching out to DICE. So just keep that in mind. If you're going here to comment, please be including comments that are actually relevant to the guidance document. Don't be including comments here asking for FDA to reach out to you with answers to questions that you're posting publicly. They may do so, but I would definitely recommend that you don't do that. Here's a good comment from Medical Imaging and Technology Alliance. Here they specifically call out that they would appreciate additional clarity concerning the process for handling products cleared under this guidance once the public health emergency has ended. I mean, this docket number covers a broad range of guidances, and if you want to find specific comments related to an individual guidance, you can do a relevant search, in this case for face masks, and you can pull up the specific results. Nonetheless, that comment is still pertinent regarding what happens following the pandemic in terms of how these devices are going to be managed. What is the plan? And CDRH is working on pulling some of that together, and they've given some directional comments that they think that it makes sense to continue to allow enforcement discretion for some period of time before expecting that products would no longer be sold. So we'll stay tuned for more information. So here we can go back to the actual guidance document, and if we make our way through here, we'll see. So again, this is the enforcement policy for face masks and respirators during the coronavirus disease COVID-19 public health emergency, and this is a revised guidance document, and it supersedes the enforcement policy that was issued in April of 2020. And if we go down, we can see that this particular guidance is applicable to CDRH and OPEQ, that's the Office of Product Evaluation and Quality within CDRH. And here's a public comment, pretty standard statement here that this guidance is being implemented without prior public comment, and that comments may be submitted at any time at regulations.gov, which we just checked out. Additional copies are available, and questions can be directed to CDRH COVID-19 surgical masks at fda.hhs.gov. We can get into the table of contents and into the meat of the guidance document here. So here's some general front matter that FDA includes in a lot of these coronavirus guidance documents. And if we move further on, we'll see again some detail about the fact that prior public participation is not feasible according to FDA's determination, and that this guidance document, along with other guidance documents like it, are being implemented immediately, but remain subject to comment and, in this case, revision, as we can see. If we move on here to some of the background, again, more general background about the current pandemic, and a comment here that FDA believes the policy set forth in this guidance may help address these urgent public health concerns by clarifying the regulatory landscape of face masks and respirators, helping to expand the availability of general use face masks for use by the general public, and filtering facepiece respirators, including N95 respirators, for use by healthcare providers in healthcare settings. Again, this supersedes the earlier guidance. Now here we get into the scope. So this is the first piece that would be useful to take away from today's video, is to understand what products are within scope. So here FDA identifies the devices that are within scope of the guidance document, and generally face masks fall within the definition of a device when they're intended for medical purpose, including for use by healthcare providers. Face masks that are not intended for medical purpose are not medical devices, as described in further detail below. And here are the FDA regulated face masks. And here are a number of product codes identified. So here we can see this policy does not apply to other types of masks, including but not limited to these. And so this would be a humidifier respiratory mask, humidifier respiratory gas, anesthetic masks, oxygen masks, resuscitator and ventilator, and gas masks. So these various product codes are identified here, as well as the relevant classification regulation here on the left-hand side. And FDA recognizes, they say here, when personal protective equipment or PPE, such as FDA-cleared surgical masks or respirators, are unavailable, individuals, including healthcare providers, might improvise. FDA does not intend to object to individuals' distribution and use of improvised PPE when FDA-cleared or authorized surgical masks or respirators are not available. Sort of a broader general comment that if you don't have access to an FDA-cleared device, FDA expects that you'll do whatever you can. And that was particularly relevant more several months ago than now, but nonetheless, it still stands. And for the purposes of this guidance, the following definitions are used. So this is the second piece to take away from today's video, is what is a face mask? Here, FDA gives you a definition. It may or may not meet fluid barrier or filtration efficiency levels, and they're used for in general, use for the general public. And face shields are a device to protect the user's eyes and face from bodily fluid, liquid, splashes, or potentially infectious materials. And generally, it's situated on the crown of the head and constructed with plastic. A surgical mask is a mask that's specifically intended to provide a physical barrier to fluids and particulate materials, and the mask meets certain fluid barrier protection standards and Class 1 or Class 2 flammability tests. And then a filtering facepiece respirator is a device that is a disposable, half-face-piece, non-powered, air-purifying particulate respirator intended for use to cover the nose and mouth of the wearer to help reduce wearer exposure to pathogenic biological airborne particulates. And then there's an N95 respirator, and you'll find these either surgical grade or potentially for use in painting and other more construction kinds of uses. But here specifically, FDA is talking about the N95 respirators intended for medical purposes or as medical devices, a disposable, a half mask filtering facepiece respirator that covers the user's airway, nose, and mouth, and offers protection from particulate materials at an N95 filtration efficiency level per the relevant CFR. Such an N95 FFR used in a healthcare setting is regulated by FDA and is either a Class 2 device that exempt from pre-market notification requirements under Section 510K or is a Class 2 cleared device. And here there is also a little bit further detail about NIOSH approved N95 respirators and surgical N95 respirators, a disposable FFR used in a healthcare setting that's worn by a healthcare provider during procedures to protect both the patient and the healthcare provider from the transfer of microorganisms. So then we get into the actual policy. So this is the next thing to take away. And the policy varies depending on the specific device and the use case in question. So here, FDA is looking to take steps to expand the availability of face masks and respirators and believes the policy set forth in this guidance may help address the urgent public health concerns caused by shortages by taking a risk-based approach and clarifying policies that FDA intends to apply to masks, respirators, including those products' associated indications and claims. So here, for face masks, face shields, and N95 respirators not intended for a medical purpose, these don't meet the definition of a medical device, and these products are devices when they are intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease. Other face masks, face shields, and FFRs are marketed to the general public for general non-medical purposes, such as use in construction and other industrial applications, because they're not intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease. FDA device marketing authorization is not required, and all the other requirements do not apply to manufacturers, importers, and distributors of these products. Face masks, face shields, and respirators are devices when they are intended for a medical purpose, such as prevention of infectious disease transmission, including uses related to COVID-19. Face masks, face shields, and respirators are not devices when they are intended for a non-medical purpose, such as for use in construction. So, when evaluating whether these products are intended for a medical purpose, among other considerations, FDA will consider whether, one, they are labeled or otherwise intended for use by a healthcare professional, they are labeled or otherwise for use in a healthcare facility or environment, and they include any drugs, biologics, or antimicrobial, antiviral agents. And here, face masks intended for a medical purpose that are not intended to provide liquid barrier protection. In general, FDA recommends that a healthcare provider follow current Centers for Disease Control and Prevention guidance regarding personal protective equipment, or PPE, that should be used during the COVID-19 outbreak. Healthcare employers must also comply with standards of OSHA that require PPE to protect workers that apply to infectious disease hazards. And face masks are to be used for source control only and are not personal protective equipment, meaning they're not suitable for FFRs or for surgical face masks. So these face masks that are going to be used to prevent the spread of particulate coming out of someone who's coughing, as opposed to protect someone who's in the room or nearby when someone coughs. So here in April, FDA provided flexibility regarding distribution and use of face masks without compliance with certain regulatory requirements, including submission of a 510K. FDA's policy was based on the evolving public health emergency and the increased need for devices for source control. In addition to this policy, in the April 2nd, 2020 publication of this guidance, FDA provided flexibility regarding distribution and use of face masks without compliance with certain regulatory requirements, including submission of a 510K under certain circumstances. FDA's policy was based on the evolving public health response to the shortage of face masks. On April 18th, FDA issued an EUA for certain face masks that FDA determined to meet the criteria for issuance under Section 564 of the Act. And this EUA has succeeded in increasing the availability of face masks for healthcare providers and the general public for use as source control when FDA-cleared masks are not available. Wherever possible, healthcare providers and the general public should continue to use FDA-cleared face masks as source control, or when those are not available, face masks authorized under the EUA. However, to help foster the availability of equipment that might offer some benefit to healthcare providers and the general public during the COVID-19 outbreak, FDA is continuing its April 2nd, 2020 policy regarding face masks, recognizing that there is some overlap with the EUA. So, thus, for the duration of the current public health emergency, FDA does not intend to object to the distribution and use of face masks with or without a face shield, not including respirators, that are intended for a medical purpose, whether used by medical personnel or the general public, without compliance to normal regulatory requirements. Again, when the face mask does not create undue risk. So FDA is providing a great deal of flexibility during this pandemic to enable users of face masks preferentially to use those devices that are FDA cleared or on the market legally in the US. And second, to then use products that have an EUA, an emergency use authorization. And third, if those two types of products are not available, to then use a product that may not have either of those designations. And here, a number of various requirements that FDA is waiving during the pandemic for these types of products. The product, including labeling that accurately describes the product as a face mask, or I should say, FDA currently believes such devices would not create an undue risk where the product includes labeling that accurately describes the product as a face mask. The product includes labeling that makes recommendations that would reduce sufficiently the risk of use, for example, recommendations against the use in a surgical setting. And the product is not intended for any use that would create an undue risk in light of the public health emergency. For example, the labeling does not include uses for antimicrobial or antiviral protection or related uses for infection prevention or reduction or related uses, and does not include particulate filtration claims. And here, in terms of face shields intended for a medical purpose, in general, FDA recommends that healthcare professionals follow current Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, guidance regarding PPE that should be used during the COVID-19 outbreak. Healthcare employers should also comply with the standards, again, of OSHA. And FDA does not intend to object to the distribution or use of face masks that are intended for a medical purpose, again, whether used by medical personnel or the general public, when those products don't comply with what FDA would generally expect these products to comply with these various requirements. FDA currently believes such devices would not create such an undue risk, again, where the product includes labeling that accurately describes the product as a face shield. The face shield does not contain any materials that will cause flammability, or the product meets Class 1 or Class 2 flammability requirements, and the product is not intended for any use that would create an undue risk. And again, for surgical masks intended to provide liquid barrier protection, again, FDA is not going to object to the distribution and use of surgical masks without compliance to the standard regulatory requirements during the crisis, as long as such devices meet fluid resistance testing requirements consistent with ASTM F1862, and the product meets Class 1 or Class 2 flammability requirements per 16 CFR 1610, unless labeled with recommendation against use in those scenarios where that's an issue. And the product includes labeling that accurately describes the product as a surgical mask, and the product is not intended for any use that would create undue risk. So pretty consistent throughout in terms of all these various different products. And here FDA goes into a discussion of alternatives when FDA cleared or NIOSH approved N95 respirators are not available. CDC has published a document on its website. You could go check that out. This is a part of a set of crisis management recommendations, identifies alternatives to FDA cleared or NIOSH approved N95 respirators approved under standards used in other countries, some of which were evaluated under methods that are similar to NIOSH approved N95 respirators. And again, FDA has provided flexibility. FDA's policy was based on the evolving crisis, and the guidance recommended that importers take appropriate steps to verify the authenticity of products that they import. And then FDA discusses again the emergency use authorizations, and FDA has become aware of concerns regarding the performance of certain respirators based on testing conducted by the CDC. This indicates that greater FDA oversight of respirators that are not FDA cleared or authorized under the EUA is important to protect the public health. As a result of these changed circumstances, FDA is discontinuing its previous policy from April 2nd, 2020, under which FDA did not intend to object to the distribution and use of certain respirators. Okay, so FDA currently believes that FDA cleared or NIOSH approved N95 respirators should be used when they're available, but when they are not, FDA recommends using FDA authorized respirators before any other alternatives. This is consistent with CDC's approach for optimizing the supply of N95 respirators. FDA does not recommend using a product as a respirator unless it has been FDA cleared, NIOSH approved, or authorized by FDA for emergency use as a respirator. So this is where we have a little bit of differentiation in terms of the policy here. And here FDA goes on to say such a product could instead be used as a face mask for source control. In that case, the product should be labeled accordingly and not used as a respirator. In addition, FDA notes that healthcare providers should ensure that respirators adequately fit. Hospitals and end users should be aware that it may be difficult to achieve an adequate fit when wearing respirators with ear loops instead of head straps. And when a proper fit is not achieved for a respirator, it should not be used as a respiratory protective device. So you need a good fit to ensure that it will actually work as intended. And getting that good fit, as we've seen in a number of photos, can cause issues with the skin that's directly in contact with that respirator device. So regardless, it's kind of a rough situation. So here, FDA then adds a little bit of further detail on the emergency use authorization for face masks intended for a medical purpose, surgical masks, and N95 respirators. And again, reiterates wherever possible, healthcare facilities should continue to use FDA cleared surgical masks and NIOSH approved and/or FDA cleared N95 respirators or better. In response to the current crisis, FDA has also issued emergency use authorizations that authorized certain FFRs, and including NIOSH approved FFRs, imported non-NIOSH approved disposable FFRs from certain jurisdictions, including China, and non-NIOSH approved disposable FFRs manufactured in China for use in healthcare settings by healthcare professionals. These emergency use authorizations are intended to help increase availability of these devices to frontline personnel during the public health emergency. And FDA has also issued an emergency use authorization for face masks for use by the general public and by healthcare professionals as source control. For the devices that do not fall within the scope of these emergency use authorizations, FDA is interested in interacting with manufacturers on additional device-specific emergency use authorizations. This may include manufacturers of masks and respirators that are not currently legally marketed in the US, as well as manufacturers who have not previously manufactured masks or respirators with capabilities to increase supply of these devices. And FDA is asking that any of these kinds of manufacturers reach out to this email, cdrh-covid19-surgical masks at fda.hhs.gov. And FDA believes that the information that any manufacturers decide to send them would be valuable in assessing whether the device would be able to meet emergency use authorization requirements. FDA believes that companies may already have available information to help support a request, and FDA will expeditiously review this information and other required information to determine whether the device can be authorized under an EUA. And here FDA gives a little bit more detail about what they would be looking for a manufacturer to provide. And here, for any face mask or FFR, including N95 respirators, here are some additional details as well that FDA would be looking for. So this, if you're actually looking at submitting an emergency use authorization, this information here on the last 2 pages is very relevant, very helpful, quite detailed, and gives you a bit of a roadmap for what it is that you should be providing to FDA. So if we go ahead and wrap up, the 3 things again that we've discussed here today are one, what medical devices are in and out of scope. 2, what are definitions for mask, shield, or respirator, which we went through above. And 3rd, what is FDA policy for these devices and in various use cases. And hopefully you've found this particular video useful. I really want to thank you for joining me today and watching this video. And I really wish you the best in the rest of your day. And I hope that you come back to join us in the next one. Have a wonderful day. Bye.